Du lytter til MA 360, podcasten for dig, der kraftigt overvejer at sælge din virksomhed, men ikke helt ved, hvordan du skal starte. Mit navn er Beate Kornfeld, og jeg har som CEO og ejerleder været igennem salgsprocessen hele 2 gange med softwarevirksomheden Scanmarket. Og jeg ser det som min mission at give dig svar på de spørgsmål, der vil klæde dig bedst muligt på til at sælge din virksomhed. Tusind tak, fordi du lytter med, og rigtig god fornøjelse med episoden. Today, I would like to welcome Beate Kornfeld, Senior Strategist here at IDna Group. IDna Group helps companies during and after the M&A process by focusing on the company's identity and culture. Studies show that 75% of all mergers, they fail due to lack of focus on both a company's identity and culture. And this is a really high number, I think. And actually, when I first heard of this, I thought it was a typo. But it turned out to be real numbers. The study is from Bain Group. Beate, you are helping companies in their M&A process with the culture and identity part. Can you explain to us why you think it is important to consider culture and identity in M&A?
Yes, and thank you for the introduction and having me on this podcast today, Bettina. We believe that identity is a very important and culture is a very important part of M&As, because what you're essentially doing is that you're bringing 2 companies together, and the 2 companies have their own identity before you bring them together. And when you are acquiring a company and you're planning to merge and you're planning to integrate that company into your own company, then this has an effect on the identity and the culture of both companies. And we see that this is a factor that's not taken into consideration enough, that's often forgotten. And this is also the number that you referred to. So because we don't really have a focus on that topic, challenges arise. There are some cultural and identity clashes that happen when you bring the 2 companies together. And this often the result is that you don't get the synergies out of the acquisition that you actually aimed for.
So the entire business case falls apart?
Sometimes the entire business case falls apart. Sometimes it's just not as good a business case than you thought it was. Or it takes longer time to achieve what you had planned to achieve.
During my time at Scanmarket, I did 2 acquisitions, one in 2020 and one in 2021. And in the first acquisition, I was not conscious about how significant a part culture and identity actually played in order for us to be successful with our acquisition. And alongside with the acquisition process, we also ran a rebranding process, which of course included a new visual identity. So we had to start with establishing a sort of a baseline and figure out, well, what were we? So we, of course, you can't force a culture and an identity on a company. You cannot just dictate, I want to be that identity, because you have one. And we interviewed different stakeholders, board members, shareholders, customers, employees, partners, etc., in order to get this 360 degrees view. And that actually meant that we were 100% aware of our own identity and culture when we did the second acquisition. And I have to say that this helped tremendously when integrating the new company, because we could identify the cultural gaps, and by that we could also identify the potential risks. But let's rewind a little bit and start from the beginning. Can you explain to us what is the difference between culture and identity?
Yes, that is also a question that we get asked a lot, because it's not so commonly understood what the differences are, and they are often also used as synonyms. For us, there's a difference. Culture is what is it's defining how people are interacting with each other. So it is related to the inside of a company and employees, behaving of employees with each other. And identity are those elements that are very strong in the understanding who you are as a company. It also has the purpose. So purpose is a part of the identity, as we see.
So the entire purpose of your company, why do you exist? What kind of problems do you solve with your existence?
Yeah, that's part of the identity. And we also see that in how you're doing your business is part of the identity. There are some elements that are very strong in how you perceive what type of company you are. Are you a corporate? Are you not corporate? Are you family run? How are you understanding how you're doing your business? Are you very agile or are you very process focused? So there are different elements, and by having an understanding what are the elements that are very strong related to the understanding who we are as a company, these are also the elements that we as a company want to show to others. And this is then where identity also is something that we want to show to others outside. We want to tell them who we are. We are telling a story about ourselves. We are showing it through the visual identity. So identity is something that is so important that we want to show it to others. And culture is much more. We don't show all the cultural elements to others. That has an importance inside the company, but not necessarily something that we want to show outside. So identity are those elements that are so important that are part of our understanding who we are as a company, and the elements that we want to show to others outside, to also customers, right? This has also a lot to do with how we tell the story to our customers, how they are connecting to the company.
And now in terms of M&A, why do you think that acquiring companies should be aware of their own identity? Isn't it enough that they just go out and check the target company out?
Well, the interesting element in M&As is that you have an easier integration task when there's similarity in the culture and in the identity. So you need to be aware of your own identity and your own culture. Otherwise, you cannot see whether there is a match or a dismatch.
No, it's difficult to map two things to each other.
Yeah, you need to have both sides. Exactly. You cannot just look at one side. So you can only understand the differences and how difficult the integration task will be afterwards if you have an understanding of both sides.
And why do you think that's such an important part as identity and culture? Why do you think that this is not part of the due diligence process in most companies when they acquire new companies?
Yeah, well, what we hear is that the due diligence is happening in a very short period of time, and there are a lot of agendas. And we hear from CEOs that this is such a time pressure and such a stressful time. And because culture and identity are a little bit the forgotten factors in M&As, this is not something that there's a lot of focus on. So in the due diligence, there are other agendas that are more pressing. But we believe that it would be good to have it as a part of the due diligence because it affects the business case. If you can see that the integration will be very difficult or maybe almost impossible, then you can adjust the business case. And then you also need to maybe reconsider going through with that acquisition at all.
What I have noticed, and I can also see it from my own experiences, when we were acquired by a private equity and the strategy was to grow, of course, the best we could, either through organic growth, of course, but also through acquisitions. And because this was such a new topic for me, I'd never acquired a company before. Then, I focused all of my energy on evaluating the business case or putting together the business case, figuring out where the synergies were and how the strategic fit was with this company. And it was something that was new to me, so it didn't run on autopilot. I think that a lot of private equity companies could actually benefit from pulling people in to help the CEO focus on integration and let him know that there is a time after closing. And the sooner that you identify the cultural fit and the better you'd be able to put together your integration strategy. And now with this study that actually shows that 75% of mergers fail due to lack of this knowledge, I actually think it makes really good sense to pull this forward and make sure that we have some attention attached to this in the due diligence process. In what type of acquisition do you think it is most important to work with identity?
It is most important when you plan to integrate the company afterwards.
Yeah.
So of course, if you're having a strategy that you are acquiring companies that shall be stand-alones afterwards, then the integration is not something that gives you headaches. Then of course you can acquire companies with a different identity because they will have their own space. They will be let alone. They can continue the way they're doing their business.
Can you say, perhaps give us some examples of when it makes good sense to actually leave them as a standalone entity?
Well, it depends on the brand architecture that you have in place, with how you have organized your business and your business approach, the way you're doing your acquisitions. But when your plan is to integrate the company afterwards, when this is part of the business case that you want to have, that you want to achieve synergies, and usually when you want to achieve synergies, then people play a role in that. And as soon as you want to have the people from the target company and your company working together and collaborating together, then you need to be aware of how well will that go and what will be the challenges for these teams to work together afterwards.
I know you mentioned to me earlier on that a typical strategy where it makes good sense to leave a company as their own identity is, of course, when we're talking consumers, that it's a brand, house of brands strategy, you could say. Then, of course, it makes good sense. But even so, don't you see that there are certain synergies that could still be achieved? I mean, do you need to have your own financial department, or how do you see that?
Yes, but when you have a house of brand strategy and you leave the brand as it is, and you continue to invest into that brand because it is as you say, consumer-facing brand, and you leave the brand as it is, then the people can keep the identity that they connect with that brand. And then it's easier for them to understand, yes, of course, we are collaborating behind the scenes on the financial part or the way we are having the processes, but we are still having our small island that we are connected.
Change their identity.
Exactly, that we are connected to. So in that case, that's less than an issue because you leave them their own identity and they continue because this is what they feel connected to. This is what they want to, go to work and want to contribute to that. And as long as that is staying in place because it makes sense from brand architecture and from the business strategy of the company, then this is totally fine. The challenges arise when you are planning to integrate, when you are planning to become one afterwards, when this acquired company shall become part of your team. And if you're planning to take their identity away and their brand and their name and maybe also their culture, if you're planning to taking that away from them, then you need to be aware of how strong are they actually attached to that, and what can they see themselves in the new identity and in the new culture, or will there be a mismatch so that people are saying, I don't want to be part of that, I'm leaving. So this is something that needs to be considered in terms of what is actually the rationale behind the acquisition and what is the overall strategy that's in place here.
During the second acquisition of ours, I had hired right before people and culture manager. And her job was to make sure that everybody was aware of our guiding principles and our values, etc., and also knew how to act according to those principles. And I had her take part in the due diligence process, actually for an interview as many of the employees as we were allowed to. And that gave us a very valuable insight into their decision-making process and also into their culture, so that we were able to somehow find out, well, do they have processes that are better than ours, or do they do things in a different way, or where are the gaps? And then we could at least talk about the differences and align expectations. And I thought it was really, really beneficial to the entire integration that she got on board as early as that. But if you were to give your advice, when would you start working with this? When you are doing an acquisition, when would you look at this topic?
Well, I think it's a very good example of how you did it, as you said from the very beginning, because we would say as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. Coming back to the point, if the business case is to integrate that company, you need to know whether this whole business case makes sense and is possible to realize. And here, identity and culture play a role. So we suggest that you, in the due diligence phase, already start looking at it. And as identity is expressed, you can take a look also on the way the company is talking about themselves. The way it's the visual identity. How are they expressing their identity? You can go on fairs and see how they're expressing themselves there. So there you already can get a feeling of what do they think is worth knowing about who they are as a company. And I think it's very good to already in this very first step, when you get to know a company, also try to talk not just to the management, but also to employees. Yeah. Because the management, of course, they want to have the acquisition to happen. They are telling you what you want to hear. Mm-hmm. But talking to employees and having then maybe also someone who has focus on these topics and know how to talk to people helps tremendously, that they also can open up and that they feel they can openly talk about who they are and what they value and what they believe is important and why they go to work every day. So we recommend as fast as possible. And if it's not possible in the due diligence phase, then if you're planning to integrate, before you make the integration plan. Because then you need to know what you're going into, and then you can plan the integration phase accordingly.
We, the first time we were acquired, some of us in the management team were actually asked to do personality test. So there was a psychologist brought in and testing us. And it was a little bit, intimidating in the beginning, because, now they know exactly who I am. But I think it was a good idea looking back, because they did this in order to figure out how to best motivate us. What is it that would make us run as fast as we could? So I think that's also something that you could think of doing, as part of your due diligence work. I'd like to ask you, though, how can we detect that we have an identity issue with an acquired target company?
Yeah, you can detect that when you can read it in people when they are starting to disconnect, when you feel that they're not really with you on the journey, when you can see that they are starting to come up with their own truth, starting to tell a different story. You can also see that a sign is also when they are sticking together with their old group of colleagues and not mingling with the new colleagues. This is also a sign that they're trying to hold on to something that they had. And you can try to listen to them, how they're telling the story. So there you can also understand whether they taking something of the new identity or culture into their own. Is that part of how they describe the company going forward? So language is very powerful here. Behavior is very powerful. So you can observe behavior. You can observe what words are they using, what language are they using, how are they describing.
when we were in the process, in the exit process, a lot of the private equities asked to have a dinner before we were acquired. And I think that's actually a pretty good way to also get a good feel of people, because you know when you are during interviews, you have your sort of your professional face on, but during a dinner you're allowed to ask more informal questions like where do you like to go on vacation, and what do you do in your spare time, and so on. And it gives you a good idea of the person. And piecing these things together with different parts of the management group is also an important thing, because it gives you a very good insight into the people and the identity and actually the culture. Is it something that you see done normally, or was this just something that they used?
I think there is a very big need of getting to know the new management, but we see a challenge if it's only on the management level.
Yeah.
And because you also need to be aware.
Sometimes you don't have access to anyone else.
Yes, that's totally true. But just the management level, then this is of course the top of the organization. Mm-hmm. They sometimes have a different view than the employees. Mm. And wanting to have a successful integration, you need to have, it's like the tip of an iceberg, right? Yeah. But you need to have the entire iceberg with you.
How do you do that then?
Well, as I said, if it's not possible in the due diligence phase in the beginning, do it right after. Mm-hmm. We think it's just so important to get access to employees and to get an understanding of how do they tell the story. And we also do it like anonymously. So when we do the interviews and when we do the quantitative service that we have in place, it's anonymous.
So it's a questionnaire that you present all employees to?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then they are much more open because, first of all, we are a third party. Yeah. And they trust us that we're not giving the data further, that we are not, we are bringing the insights back to the companies and the acquiring companies, but not all the details. So they trust us that this is a safe space for them to talk. And here they are so open. We learned so many things that you would be surprised getting these insights back. So this is just a different layer of an understanding who this company is. Mm.
Have you been into situations where you'd have to, design a different integration approach after you have received the results back from those surveys?
Well, it is usually not that the company then decides that the integration is not happening or that the deal is not happening, because there are other reasons why the deal is interesting. But it is that companies then adjust the integration plan and they adjust the expectations towards the integration plan. And as I also talked this morning about when we had this shared seminar, we are just right now working with a company. There was an integration planned, but because of identity issues, there's no integration happening right now. Mm-hmm. So the company fought for the right to stay independent. I mean, it was not possible to integrate that company, although that was the planned business case in the beginning. So here it was due to identity issues that they had to change the strategy of this acquisition, and how, of course, it's still an acquisition, they are still an ownership, but now it's a different model.
Have you seen examples of integrations where you know that there is a poor cultural fit and two very identities that are very far away from each other, but where you think, well, hey, this could work anyway, or would you then advise us not to go through with this acquisition?
What our job is to present back red flags and to present back how we think where the red flags are. Mm. And we can also advise on what we think does this imply, but it's not as I said, there are so many other elements in making the decision whether this is a good business case and whether you want to go through with that or not. It's identity and culture are usually not the reason why you are pulling off, but it's just manage the expectations and the better understanding what you're going into, and maybe also a more realistic expectation, and in terms also of the time frame. So yes, maybe I have planned these synergies, but because of the culture and identity issues that I'm facing, that might be that it will take longer time and that I maybe need to approach the integration differently. So it is usually not something where we advise not to go through. It's just our job to raise the red flags and to prepare the organization or the company that is acquiring. What are they going into?
So, in your experience, how long time would it take to integrate a new company? Let's take an example. There's a company, it's about a third of your own size. How long time would you have to allow for integration?
Well, you cannot do it in less than a year. It takes time. And I think it is also an understanding of what comes first, right? You have, in an acquisition, you have so many things that you need to do at the same time almost. Yeah. So understanding where the difficult parts are also helps you to prioritize better. So for us, it's not really a question, when are you done with an integration? Because maybe the market is changing and then you need to change anyhow the entire company, then something else is happening. When are you done changing? Maybe never.
Yeah.
So that's difficult to answer when an integration is complete. But I think understanding what are the issues helps you also to better prioritize. What are the decisions that we need to take in the very beginning, and what are maybe elements that can wait a little bit longer along the way?
So at which point do your clients typically come to you?
When it's too late. They typically, because we talked about this in the beginning, right? Because, who is right now present in an M&A field? We have a lot of financial capacities. We have a lot of management capacity. We have a lot of lawyers that are in this field advising companies. We have a lot of, there are other capacities and knowledges that work with M&A right now. And culture and identity often is not considered. And because this is the fact, you first kind of go through with an acquisition, and then you realize something is not really working here. And then we get a call saying, can you help us? We are seeing challenges here. So we think that it could have been avoided if you have worked with that from the beginning and was aware of it. But this is right now the reality, that a lot of companies are first understanding that this is important when they can see the challenges happening in the everyday work between their employees, and if they see that people are leaving. This is of course always a sign, right? If you can't retain the talents from the acquired company, then this is the sign that something is not working very well.
Yeah.
Yes. And sometimes it's also very practical questions. We got a call from a customer said, we need to do a presentation for our shared company now, and we actually don't know what logo we should put on that presentation.
Yeah.
So these just very simple question made them aware of, we did not talk about this until now.
Yeah.
What brand are we actually using?
Yeah.
Are we integrating these two brands? Are we creating a new one? Are we using the one or the other?
And that's a typical sign, or if you have those kind of problems, then the chances of you reaching the business case numbers, the cross-sale numbers, would probably be pretty slim, because people are confused and they don't even know which paper to actually send off quotes.
Yeah. And this is something that you're in an M&A, every company is changing, right? You as the acquiring one are also going through a change. The acquired company is going through the change. Something that you don't want to happen in that phase is confusion.
Yeah.
And that, also the people get the feeling of they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Right? This brings insecurity in a phase where there is already insecurity happen.
Yeah.
So you actually don't want to have that.
No, that's poison for good integration, I'd say, because then people start to distrust management, and then it's really hard to control their way of thinking.
Yeah,
and move forward.
And also from an external perspective, right? I mean, we know that customers and also the financial market is looking towards when an acquisition is happening, right? So what is the integration plan? Do they have a plan for the integration afterwards? And also customers can get confused.
Yeah.
Who are they now? Who am I dealing now with? So this is also, it does not only have an internal side, it also has an external side to give security towards your customers, that you know how this company is going to be after the acquisition. What is this new company? What is this new brand standing for? What is the brand name going forward?
Yeah. It's interesting because you mentioned before that you didn't think that it would be possible to do an integration in less than 12 months, and I totally agree. I actually think that it takes a bit longer than that. And I talked to the person in charge of integrating companies at Christian Hansen, and her take on this was 2 years at a minimum. Because we're talking about people and we are talking about change. And it is just a lot more difficult. It just doesn't happen overnight. And I think that if you look at that, and you are private equity, and you know that the average ownership time of a private equity is 5.5 years, then a structured approach to this would be really, really handy, because otherwise you'd end up not actually getting your money's worth of the acquisitions that you make.
Yeah, and this is also an interesting point. Studies show that I think the numbers are 90% have a structured approach for everything that's pre-closing. They know exactly what steps to go through.
Yeah.
But only 40% have approach and structured approach for the integration. So there's this, okay, what now?
Yeah.
And if you're not prepared for what comes after you sign the deal, then, as you said, you are risking getting the value out of the acquisition.
Yeah. And I mean, you will get value out of it, but you don't get the value that you expected and you based your business case on. And if you do have limited time, which you do if you're owned by private equity, then the more structure, the better, I would say. Beate, this has been extremely exciting, and I think we could probably continue for hours here. But I would like to thank you for helping our listeners understand the importance of culture and identity, and also the difference between the two. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bettina, for having me.
Tusind tak, fordi du lyttede med. Og vil du sende dit spørgsmål vedrørende salgsproces og lignende til panelet, så følg linket i show notes og udfyld den kort formular. Igen, tusind tak, fordi du lyttede med. Mit navn er Bettina, og vi høres ved.